Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Optimizing Nutrition and Protein on GLP-1s, Clinical Recommendations and Real-World Insights. I'm Leslie Samay, Director of Professional Development at Great Valley Publishing, and I'm your host for today's webinar. Before we get started, I have a few points of housekeeping. First, in order to claim your credit, you have to stay with us through the entire hour-long presentation. Second, you can use the Q&A box if you have a question related to the content of today's presentation. We'll address questions at the end of the session and we'll try to get to as many as time allows. You can use the chat box feature to engage in side conversations with your fellow webinar attendees or to seek technological help from me if you should need it. Finally, our accreditation statement, Optimizing Nutrition and Protein on GLP-1s, Clinical Recommendations and Real-World Insights awards 1 CPEU in accordance with the Commission on Dietetic Registrations, CPEU Prior Approval Program. And the responsible provider for this activity is the Meat Institute. Now on to our disclosures. Our speakers have the following relevant financial relationships to report. Michelle Cardel is a Weight Watchers employee and shareholder. Emily Krause is an employee of the National Pork Board. And Travis Masterson has received grant or research funding from AG1, National Pork Board, Alliance for Potato Research and Education, McCormick Science Institute, and the National Dairy Council. And he's also an employee of Reactivity Insights. Now I'm happy to turn it over to and to introduce today's moderator, Emily Krause. Emily Krause is a registered dietitian with almost a decade of experience driving nutrition communications and health initiatives in the food, grocery retail, and commodity sectors. In her current role as the Director of Nutrition, Health, and Wellness Initiatives at the National Pork Board, she leads healthcare professional education and engagement through the Pork and Partners healthcare professional community. Welcome to you, Emily. I'll turn it over to you to take it from here.
Thank you, Leslie. And thank you all for being here today. I am so excited to have you here and to introduce you to today's speakers, Dr. Michelle Cardel and Dr. Travis Masterson. Dr. Michelle Cardel is a nutrition scientist, registered dietitian, and chief nutrition officer at Weight Watchers. She also serves as a faculty member at the University of Florida, where she co-directs the Center for Integrative Cardiovascular and Metabolic Diseases. At Weight Watchers, Dr. Cardel leads clinical trials, the program innovation team, and the nutrition and food database. Her team shapes the organization's nutrition strategy using the latest science, develops evidence-based programs, and ensures the most cutting-edge science is integrated into member programs and content. Dr. Travis Masterson is the director of the Health Adjusted Behavior and Technology Laboratory and the Broadhurst Career Development Professor for the study of health promotion and disease prevention at Penn State University. His research focuses on food cue reactivity, how our food environment shapes our food choices and eating behaviors, and on digital food and beverage marketing. Dr. Masterson uses a variety of novel technologies and methodologies in his work, including fMRI, immersive virtual reality, and ecological momentary assessment. Welcome to both. And Michelle, I'm pleased to hand it over to you to get the session started.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to talk with you about GLP-1s, which everyone has, been buzzing around as of late. So we're witnessing a historic shift in obesity care. The newest generation of weight management medications isn't just moving the needle, it's really rewriting what's possible. In phase 3 clinical trials, once-weekly treatments have delivered unprecedented results, with people losing 15% to 21% of their body weight in just about 1 year. And these outcomes were once unimaginable in traditional approaches, and they're really redefining how we think about obesity and its treatment. But it's important to remember that this moment didn't happen overnight. Weight management medications have been part of the story for decades. Phentermine, for example, was first approved in 1959, and orlistat was approved in 1999. What's different today is that game-changing effectiveness of the newest class of drugs. GLP-1 receptor agonist and dual GLP-1 GIP therapies, shown here in purple, these medications delivered as daily or weekly injections can help people lose 8% to over 20% of their body weight. And the innovation doesn't just stop there. Oral GLP-1s and other promising treatments are already in the pipeline, poised to make obesity care even more effective and accessible. We've come a long way since the early days of orlistat. The true breakthrough with today's medications lies in how precisely they harness the body's own biology. Many of the treatments making headlines, like Wegovy, act by mimicking the natural GLP-1 hormone. Others, like Zepbound, push the science further, activating both the GLP-1 and GIP receptors to deliver a more powerful combined effect. And what makes these medications so effective is not just that they curb appetite, it's that they fundamentally change how the body responds to food. By dialing down hunger signals, amplifying feelings of fullness, and slowing the rate at which food leaves the stomach, they help people naturally reduce calorie intake without that constant battle. They also quiet food noise, that relentless preoccupation with food that many people living with obesity experience, helping to free up that mental space and reduce that daily struggle around eating. The results in clinically significant sustained weight loss and a dramatically improved relationship with food, those are outcomes that were nearly unimaginable with older therapies. The impact of these medications goes even deeper than appetite and satiety. They may actually reshape how the brain responds to the food itself. Recent research from Dr. Corby Martin and his team at Pennington Biomedical Research Center on tirzepatide, which is the active ingredient in Zepbound and Mounjaro, shows just that. And in a 6-week phase 1 randomized controlled trial, participants taking tirzepatide showed decreased activation in brain regions tied to food reward, alongside meaningful behavioral changes, including fewer cravings for sweets, fast food, fats, and refined carbs. They also observed reduced impulsivity and disinhibition, and a significant drop in overall energy intake compared to placebo. Interestingly, when it came to foods that are higher in protein, lower in fat, lower in carbs, tirzepatide didn't actually dampen the brain response. In fact, participants' brains reacted to protein-rich foods much like they did to neutral non-object foods. This suggests that while tirzepatide helps quiet cravings for less healthful foods, it may leave the door open for healthier choices, including protein choices, to play a central role in long-term weight management. As groundbreaking as these medications are, they're not a standalone solution. The FDA is very clear. Every GLP-1 receptor agonist approved for weight management carries the exact same guidance. These treatments must be combined with behavior change in order to optimize health and well-being. In other words, medication can still quiet food noise, reduce cravings, and rewire how the brain responds to food. But optimizing health and well-being still depends on building sustainable habits around nutrition, physical activity, sleep, and other behaviors that support long-term health. It's a powerful combination of clinical innovation and behavior modification that unlocks the greatest impact for weight management. And this is where dietitians really have an opportunity to shine. That's why behavior modifications recommended for people for taking GLP-1s really look different from those than in traditional behavioral weight management programs. In standard approaches, the emphasis is often on managing external influences that influence eating behavior, like cravings and stress eating, alcohol intake, and on meticulous tracking of food and beverages to really help defend that calorie deficit. But for patients using GLP-1s, the medications take care of the calorie deficit by addressing the biological drivers of obesity. Food noise is quieter, hunger is reduced, and overall intake naturally decreases. This creates a unique opportunity and a new challenge. Instead of focusing primarily on restraint, the priority really shifts to nutritional adequacy, making sure patients are getting enough calories and protein, fiber, vitamins, minerals to support health, preserve lean mass, fuel daily life, even when they're eating less. And that focus on nutritional adequacy isn't just theoretical, it's actually backed by data. A recent 2-part study revealed that while GLP-1 medications are highly effective for weight loss, they can also put patients at risk for nutritional deficiencies if diet quality isn't addressed. In part 1, researchers analyzed claims from over 400,000 adults prescribed a GLP-1 receptor agonist. Within the first 6 months, 12.7% developed a nutritional deficiency, climbing to almost 1 in 4 after 12 months. Strikingly, only 8% had seen a dietitian, and on average, not until 4 months into treatment. In part 2 of the study, a matched cohort study compared adults with type 2 diabetes taking metformin alone versus those on both metformin and a GLP-1. At 12 months, the group taking a GLP-1 had a significantly higher incidence of nutritional deficiencies. Together, these findings highlight a critical reality. GLP-1s may quiet hunger and drive weight loss, but without intentional guidance, many patients aren't getting the nutrition their bodies still need. And that is why pairing medication with tailored nutrition and lifestyle support is essential. These findings also shine a spotlight on the critical role of registered dietitians. In the study, patients who met with a registered dietitian were 1.4 to 1.5 times more likely to have nutritional deficiencies identified because dietitians know what to look for and they actually take the time to screen for them. Among those who had an RD visit, 1 in 3 were diagnosed with a deficiency, with 6% experiencing nutritional anemia and 4% showing signs of muscle loss. While these numbers partly reflect that higher risk or more complex patients are often referred to dietitians, they also underscore a key point. Without skilled nutrition professionals involved, deficiencies can easily go unnoticed. And when patients are already eating less due to GLP-1 treatment, missed deficiencies can quickly become missed opportunities to protect health and preserve lean mass. One of the most important nutritional concerns for people on GLP-1 medications is that muscle loss. Given the significant amount of overall weight loss achieved with these drugs, protecting lean mass becomes essential. Supporting GLP-1 users with adequate protein intake is one of the most effective strategies to help preserve muscle when paired with resistance training while still reaping the benefits of weight reduction. The challenge is that these medications don't just reduce calorie intake, they reduce macronutrients across the board. Studies show that GLP-1 users cut their total energy intake by between 16% and 39%. In a randomized controlled trial of 50 participants, those taking liraglutide, a long-acting GLP-1, it's a daily injection, had a 17% reduction in protein intake. And it's not just the amount of protein, it's also the type. Survey data from nearly 2,000 participants revealed that people currently or previously taking a GLP-1 reported eating less beef, pork, and chicken, foods that are among the most concentrated, high-quality sources of protein per serving. And this is where registered dietitians can make a tremendous impact. By helping patients identify and prioritize high-quality protein sources, especially animal proteins for those patients for which it is appropriate because they can deliver more protein and fewer calories, dietitians can play a key role in protecting lean muscle mass during weight loss. Of course, for certain patients, plant-based proteins might be more appropriate, and patients can absolutely get an adequate protein intake from plants as well. But protein is just the beginning. To truly support patients on GLP-1 medications, registered dietitians can provide a broader set of diet and lifestyle recommendations that protect nutritional adequacy and overall health. Based on the evidence, several priorities stand out. First, protein remains at the top of the list, particularly animal proteins, which will deliver more protein per serving than most plant sources and can be especially helpful for maintaining lean mass during weight loss. But protein alone isn't enough. Fiber is going to be critical for gut and heart health, while fruits and vegetables help ensure adequate intake of vitamins and minerals that may be otherwise missed when total food intake drops. Symptom management is another essential piece. Constipation is a common side effect of the GLP-1 medications, and proper hydration can make a meaningful difference in easing discomfort and keeping digestion on track. And finally, lifestyle behaviors play a pivotal role. Strength training is going to play a significant role in preserving muscle mass. Together, these strategies give patients a strong foundation to not only lose weight, but to also maintain their health in the process. And given this, we developed the GLP-1 program behavioral weight management program that was specifically tailored for those on GLP-1 medications. And this includes 3 daily minimum nutritional targets. What we heard from patients, particularly when they're titrating up, is that it's really difficult to reach nutritional targets. So we've set minimums that we want them to reach, but we really celebrate when they exceed these. So for protein, it's a minimum target of 1 gram per kilogram body weight. Research shows that we can get additional benefit up to 1.6 grams per kilogram body weight, particularly when paired with resistance training. For fruits and vegetables, we encourage patients to eat at least 4 servings of fruits and vegetables per day, but of course, we would celebrate seeing more than that. In hydration, we want a minimum of 8 cups of water per day. We're also encouraging at least 30 minutes of physical activity daily, with strength training happening at least 2 times per week. And the community touch points are going to be essential. We hear from patients living with obesity that they're, stigmatized for living in a larger body, but then they're stigmatized for losing weight on GLP-1 medications. People will often tell them, like, you need to lose weight, but no, not like that. That's cheating. And so patients have told us that they're very much looking for a non-judgmental, supportive community where they can share their experience with others on the journey. And so we provided access to Connect, which is a Weight Watchers members only social community. And we have special groups for people on weight management medications, access to 24/7 live coaching, access to virtual workshops that are tailored to those on GLP-1 and led by experienced coaches. And then, of course, our patients have access to registered dietitians as well. So the data I'm going to show here is a single-arm clinical trial that we conducted in collaboration with Dr. Leslie Heimberg at Cleveland Clinic, looking at the efficacy of combining a GLP-1 medication of either semaglutide or tirzepatide with our behavioral GLP-1 program that was tailored specifically for those on a GLP-1 medication. What we observed was that at 6 months, an average of 12.3% body weight loss. And you can see that 67% of participants lost more than 10% of their body weight at 6 months. When looking at blood pressure, we saw significant improvements in both systolic as well as diastolic blood pressure. And we see significant improvements in healthy eating index. As a registered dietitian, I was thrilled to see this. So healthy eating index, as you all know, is scored from 0 to 100, with higher numbers meaning greater diet quality. And the HEI refers to how well an individual's dietary intake aligns with the dietary guidelines for Americans. And we saw an actual 10-point increase in healthy eating index. And it's considered clinically significant with a 3-point healthy eating index score index. So to see this almost 35% improvement in diet quality was really exciting to see when combining the GLP-1 medications with a behavioral program that's specifically tailored for those on GLP-1s and really tailored with that nutritional adequacy piece in mind. In terms of healthy habits, we also saw significant improvements in terms of patients considering portion sizes, engaging in self-weighing, considering the protein content of foods, arranging the kitchen so healthy foods are easy to access, improvements in being physically active and talking kindly to oneself after a setback, planning meals for the day, tracking the food they eat, and eating more vegetables. Participants also decreased less healthy habits, including decreasing consumption of fried foods, decreasing consumption of cookies, candies, pastries, and sweets, as well as consuming less sugar-sweetened beverages. In terms of physical activity, we saw significant improvements in resistance training, with folks increasing their resistance training by over 50%. So on average, going from 2 days a week of resistance training to 2.5 days on average per week. They also decreased their amount of time spent in sedentary behavior by over an hour. Because we care about so much more than just weight and cardiometabolic health, we also care about, quality of life and what is the experience like for patients. It was really exciting to see a huge improvement in overall quality of life with 53% improvement overall, with significant shifts in physical functioning, self-esteem. Patients reported their sex life was better, that public distress had improved, as well as their quality of life at work had improved. In terms of body appreciation and weight bias internalization, we see significant improvements in body appreciation in this study. We also, very exciting to see a significant reduction in weight bias internalization. We know that patients living with obesity often have internalized the weight bias that has been spewed on them from society. And so oftentimes what I hear from patients is when they get on these medications, it's almost like a click for them to see, oh my gosh, this wasn't a reflection of me. This was a reflection of my biology. And it was my biology that was driving me to engage in these behaviors. And they get on these meds, and for the first time in their life, the food noise is reduced. They don't have that constant drive to consume excess calories. And patients report it's extremely liberating for them. We also saw, no surprise, significant reductions in hunger as well as reduction in food cravings. And one of the concerns that a lot of folks have had is, are GLP-1s really going to worsen disordered eating pathology? But we actually see the opposite in our clinical trial. We saw an almost 27% reduction in emotional eating. We saw a 35% increase in restraint and a 35% decrease in disinhibition. But in terms of disordered eating pathology, we actually saw a significant decrease as measured by the EDEQ. And we saw overall decreases in global disordered eating pathology and significant decreases within the domains of eating concern, shape concern, and weight concern. We also see significant improvements in stress and depression symptoms, with significant reductions in both perceived stress and that depression symptomology. And when looking at, so that was in a clinical trial of 180 participants on these medications. What happens when we look at this data in, thousands and thousands and thousands of members who are not in a clinical trial? And what happens in terms of a real world evidence analysis? So in over 50,000 patients who were members of Weight Watchers Clinic, we observed significant reductions in weight at 3, 6, 9, and 12 months. The orange bar is for those on GLP-1 medications alone, and we saw an average of 21% reduction in body weight at that 12-month mark. Very exciting. Not only did we see weight loss that paralleled or even slightly superseded what we observed in the pharmaceutical sponsored trials, but we actually saw a reduction in side effects, which I think is a reflection of our patients not only having access to the clinicians, but having access to registered dietitians, fitness specialists, as well as a behavioral program that really guides them towards that nutritional adequacy and helps to minimize some of those unwanted side effects. At 18 months, we see an average of 18.8% body weight loss, and at 24 months, we see that maintenance of 20.5%. So really, it seems like patients are hitting the nadir at around 12 months, and if they continue on medications, they're maintaining that body weight loss. In terms of changes in hypertension, in a sample of over 3,000 patients who joined our clinic with hypertension at baseline, at 6 months, we saw that 84% no longer had hypertension, and at 12 months, 87% had completely resolved their hypertension. Something that came up when we first started seeing patients on GLP-1s is anecdotally, we were hearing from them that they were significantly reducing their alcohol consumption and their cravings for alcohol had gone down. So we wanted to test this empirically. And we looked at over 14,000 patients, and this is the table from over 7,000 who reported any alcohol consumption at baseline. And what we see was a significant reduction in about 45% of patients on anti-obesity medications were reducing their alcohol consumption, with 52% not having no change at all. And you see here by the different medication classes how much of a reduction. I thought we were only going to see the reductions in GLP-1s, but we also saw reductions in things like metformin and bupropion and naltrexone. So in terms of thinking about how do we walk away from all of this, and what are the big takeaways? So today's findings really highlight just how transformative GLP-1 medications can be. They don't just drive clinically meaningful weight loss, they also improve blood pressure, diet quality, and even reduce alcohol consumption. But the real power comes when medication is paired with behavior change. Programs that emphasize protein and fiber intake, hydration, along with strength training, amplify these effects, supporting not only greater physical health, but also stronger behavioral and psychosocial outcomes. And perhaps most importantly, these shifts in habits and mindset can help sustain progress long term, even if GLP-1 treatment, has to change over time. We want patients to develop these long-term healthy habits. So in this way, we're not just talking about weight loss. We're seeing that GLP-1 medications, when combined with behavior change and with the support of dietitians and evidence-based programming, we're really talking about building the foundation for longer and healthier lives. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Masterson. Really excited to see what he's going to talk about today.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I'm going to be talking to you guys about some new data that's just fresh off the presses that was supported by the National Pork Board. And what we were looking at was shifts in consumer perceptions following the use of GLP-1 medications. So we were looking at what the patients themselves were saying about a variety of factors when they went on to those medications. So as Michelle kind of pointed out previously, other studies have shown that there are nutritional deficiencies as people go on to GLP-1 medications. And so we wanted to see if that came out in the consumer data as well. So this is just some data from Johnson et al., just showing like fruits and vegetable intake is still pretty low, that there's high deficiencies of a variety of micronutrients, and that across a variety of HEI categories, people are not meeting the recommendations that we would like them to. And so with that, there's a lot of concerns that can come along with RDs that are looking at patients that are going on to these GLP-1 medications. So muscle mass has already been touched on, but there's a lot of different ones as well, including lack of enjoyment from food and just thinking about the overall relationship that people have with food. So a couple of notes on our survey. The survey was designed to probe for general food behaviors and perceptions of behavior change. So we weren't tracking anything through dietary recalls per se. What we did is we used broad food behavior language and food groupings. So we're going to look at categories like fruits, vegetables, sweets, desserts, and not specific foods themselves. And our broad food behavior language, our questions were all similar to this, like, do you currently consume, crave, purchase, or like the following product category? And so what we look at that as is engagement with that product category. So you'll probably hear me say that, and it's inclusive of all those factors in that question. We also measured perceived changes in food behavior. So rather than trying to get patients to think back and say, give us a score like you would if before you were on your GLP-1 medications, we asked them to directly compare it instead. So a question would read like, compared to how much you liked foods from this group before you started taking your GLP-1 medication, how much do you like them now? We also looked at reasons to purchase foods, and we had some measures of food noise, similar to what Michelle was talking about earlier. A couple of notes: we did not measure amounts of food, timing of food, or long-term dietary trends. So when we show some data of like populations increasing their intake, we're not necessarily saying the amount of food, but the number of people that are willing to engage with a food group. So our data is, I'm just going to run through some demographics with you really quick. We ended up with 700 individuals who were currently taking GLP-1 medications. Their average BMI was about 34.9, which is what we would anticipate. We had about a 50-50 male-female split, and our race and ethnicity breakdown was nationally representative of the United States. Income and education was slightly higher than we would anticipate, but that's likely due to individuals being on GLP-1 medications having better insurance plans. And a little bit alarming, we found that we asked about if they were in a comprehensive lifestyle program or receiving RDN counseling, and only 26% of our population said yes. So even though they're on these GLP-1 medications, they're not heavily into these behavioral programs, or at least in the long term, they're not. Just as another side note, we did allow people into the study whether they were taking GLP-1 medication for weight loss or diabetes, and there's an overlap between those as well. A lot of doctors will prescribe patients with diabetes GLP-1 medications to help them reduce their weight as well. And there's a long list of medications here, just that we included quite a few different medications, but you'll notice that Ozempic is about 50% of our population, as it's one of the more popular GLP-1 medications. All right, so now we're going to look at some of this engagement data that we have. And so you'll see our different food groupings here. We have fruits, vegetables, animal proteins, salty snacks, grains, dairy, supplemental proteins, which I'll go into in a minute, sweets and desserts, and sugar-sweetened beverages. And we've got a lot of data here, so I'm going to walk you through it really quick using fruit as our example. So the respondents were asked to respond to this question of engagement, thinking before being on their GLP-1 medication as well as after. And so what you can see is about 65% of our population said that they engaged with fruit before going on to GLP-1 medications. But if we move over to the next column, after, we have 90% engaged with fruit. And so that's about a 25% shift in being willing to purchase, consume, or even like fruits. And so the initial takeaway from that is just that you're getting a population that maybe struggled to engage with these healthier food categories previously, now being willing to engage with them. And that gives us an opportunity, a window of opportunity to provide targeted counseling to these individuals. Okay, now I do want to point out we have the stopped percentage and start percentage, and this is just to get at, we have a 25% shift, but some people do go the other way. Now for fruit, we see that's only 1% stop, which is really great, just a handful of people, with 26% starting. But I'm going to show you an example down below that this is not going to be a homogeneous kind of effect on people. Some people will drop in and out of categories, and so having targeted counseling with your patients is going to be necessary. And then finally, just this p-value is just showing that there's a change before and after. So all the bolded ones had significant changes from before to after, and they're in order of the magnitude of that shift. Okay, now the other thing that we asked was which product categories had the biggest shifts. And so we did a test going up and down on this, like which are the biggest shifts. And fruit, vegetables, and animal proteins have the biggest shift, meaning consumers are more likely to engage and purchase these products after going on to GLP-1 medication. So kind of mirroring some of the data that Michelle showed earlier. Now that equal response that we were talking about, so here we see sweets and desserts and sugar sweetened beverages, which we would think that we would just see everybody have a positive response to, but we actually see about a 1 to no % shift in these categories. But what's actually happening is some people are starting and some people are starting, and we're not exactly sure why that happens, but we do see quite a few people swapping back and forth. So again, really talking to your patient would be important to understand kind of what's driving them in certain categories. All right, just breaking down protein, very similar table here for you. And so what you can see is the changes with chicken, fish, eggs, and beef all being more engaged with following GLP-1 medication usage, and chicken being at the top of that list. And then we have both our alternative proteins and our dairy foods on this table. And so a couple of things I wanted to point out is we would like consumers to consume more whole protein food sources for a variety of reasons. But it can be easy to slip in and just say, well, let's do a protein powder or protein bar. But what we're seeing is that there's relatively low amounts of engagement with protein bars and protein supplements. So even after going on to GLP-1, it's about 18 to 19% for those product categories. And so I just want to point that out as well, as on the next few slides, we're going to see protein bars and powders show up in a few categories. But I want to just contextualize and say, like, it's a small percentage of individuals that are actually using those products, at least in our survey. All right, so we asked, how much do you like this product category compared to before you were on GLP-1 medication? So one of the concerns that we had is people would like dislike food because we see appetite dropping. So is it that their food enjoyment is just dropping across the board? But that's not what we really find. You can see that across all the different product categories that we looked into, that they remain somewhat elevated, that they like them, and we'll see in a second that they crave them, those types of things. So it wasn't a complete drop off, but there are a handful of categories. That's what that orange line, everything to the left of that orange line is statistically liked more than the product categories to the right. So there are some good ones in there. So you can see vegetables, fruit, protein, vegetables, fruit, and fish, but we're missing a lot of our other protein categories there. And so that might be another point at which targeted advice to patients could be particularly useful. Now this is the same graph, but the question just changed to, do you crave it more after being on GLP-1 compared to before? So again, higher scores, meaning that they craved more after. And you'll see very similar fruit, fish, and vegetables pop up there, as well as like eggs and chicken get included. And then how often do you consume these products? So again, more people are consuming vegetables, protein, fish proteins, and fruit. And then finally, your likeliness to purchase these products. And here we get a wider range of people are saying that they're more likely to consume products from a wider range of categories. And you'll also see that there's a wider range of products that are statistically higher as well. All right, we also asked them to compare how much they were spending on food at home compared to before using their GLP-1 medication. So currently, how much are you spending compared to before? And so what you can see is this is on foods consumed at home. So we'd anticipate some reduction in spending as people are consuming less food. And so that's what's kind of reflected here. About 50% of the patient population is showing a reduction in spending on groceries and ingredients, those types of foods. But I would like to point out that the much less than before is about 13%. And the reason I do that is when we look at the amount of money spent away from home, we see that it's about 63% of the population showing reductions, with 26% showing much less than before. So this is really encouraging data, really showing that we're getting some consumer level shifts away from eating away from home with fast food and takeaway and those types of things, and a lot more being done at home. So again, another window of opportunity to work with people on grocery shopping, cooking, those types of activities. Now we can also ask them why they decide to purchase certain foods compared to before. So this is using consumer level data. So these are 5 factors that are commonly used in this type of research. So like if you've ever looked at IFIC data, for example, just asking consumers, why do they buy certain types of foods? So here we have health, taste, price, convenience, and environmental sustainability. And what we see is we asked them, was this less important, the same, or more important than before? And the only one of these 5 categories that we see a shift with it becoming more important, with 52% of the population saying this is more important to me now than it was before, is health. So health is really rising to the top of these individuals' minds, whether that's from the weight loss or the counseling that they're getting aside. That's an important shift that we're seeing. And when we asked them to rank the importance of these different factors, what we find is that taste is still the top. So taste is always king, and that's always in all the consumer data. So you can't start suggesting things that are not going to be appealing to individuals. But again, they're open to broadening their perspectives. And now what we see is health is also second on this ranking. So usually it's a battle between price, convenience, and then health sneaks in there, depending on the socioeconomic status of the individual. But what we're seeing here is that health has really placed itself right below taste by quite a bit in our rankings. And so again, that's encouraging from that perspective. All right, finally, we were able to do some analysis on their level of food noise. So food noise, Michelle mentioned this earlier, it was really a term coined by patients who were going on to GLP-1 medications and were really noticing like they didn't think or worry about food as much as they did before. So our group has a theoretical definition and others do as well. Ours is heightened or persistent manifestations of food cue reactivity, being either external cues or internal cues that drive your eating behavior. And what these patients were saying is that it led to intrusive thoughts, so like unwanted thoughts about food, that was also connected to maladaptive eating behaviors. So in this study, we measured it using a scale called the GFCQ. And I know it's a little bit small over there on the side of the screen, but there's 4 subscales of the GFCQ that we're going to be looking at. The first is preoccupation with food. And a question that would exemplify preoccupation with food is, I can't stop thinking about eating no matter how hard I try. The second subscale is loss of control, which a question would be, once I start eating, I have trouble stopping. The third subscale is positive outcome expectancy. And this is eating what I crave makes me feel better. So getting positive feedback from food. And then finally, the emotional craving subscale. A question is, I crave food when I'm upset. So it's some sort of craving or drive to eat connected to emotion specifically. And before we move on, just as a note, we have written a paper on food noise specifically for registered dietitian nutritionists that can be found in Cutting Edge Nutrition and Diabetes Care. So this is the title of the paper there. But we also, if you don't have access to that specific journal, we've made it publicly available on Penn State's open access repository, so anybody can get to it. And we go over a lot of practical tips of like what food noise is, what can you do in your clinic, what are things that you should be talking about with your patients. So that's available for anybody. Now, when we go back to the data, we're looking at current levels of food noise. So asking them to rate, like they're going to answer these 21 questions on a scale of 1 to 5. And so their total score could go up to 110. And so what you can see here is that the mean score is about 68, so about halfway up that scale, which is pretty good. And then we can look at the subscales. And what I have highlighted is that the subscales for preoccupation with food and loss of control around food are statistically lower than the other 2 subscales. And so that's kind of indicative of what patients are saying. They're not thinking about food as much, and they're really not losing control over food, like Michelle noted earlier in their data as well. Now, we also asked them to rate their change in food noise for each of those questions. So rather than answering on a scale of 1 to 5, we did a scale of 1 to 3. And 1 was less than before, 0 was same as before, and a positive 1 would be more than before. So a negative score is saying like they've improved in that specific question. And so what we saw is that patients saw about a 6-question shift. So 6 of those questions, they were saying, I am less than before on this measure. And when we look at the subscales, you can see again that patients are reporting the changes overall are coming from the preoccupation scale and the loss of control scale. So that's also heartening. We're seeing it in our data on both sides of that. People are really they're not thinking so much about food, and they're not losing control around food as much, but they're keeping that emotional and positive reward aspect of food, which is positive in a lot of ways. All right, since we asked the question this way, we can bucket our patients into 3 groups. We have those that reduced their food noise, so about 60% showed reduced food noise. 10% showed similar food noise, and 29% showed increased food noise. And anecdotally, we've done a lot of research on social media talk around food noise, and we see this pop up where a lot of people are talking about reduced food noise, and people will jump in and say, I'm on GLP-1 and I have increased food noise. I'm thinking about food more than I ever have before. And so we looked at this by medication. And so what you can see on this graph right here is on the left side are the 2nd generation GLP-1 medications and the upper doses. And as you move to the right of the graph, you see more diabetic doses and older GLP-1 medications. And the blue bars are indicating reductions in food noise. So you can see on the newer medications, you're seeing almost everybody that's on them is getting reductions in food noise. And as we move to older GLP-1 medications or diabetic doses of GLP-1 medications, you see there's a higher likelihood of increasing food noise. And so this is just highlighting the need to really consider what your patient is doing, what medication they're on, what dosage they're on, so that you can talk to them and target your advice more clearly to them. Okay, now we can go back to those food noise scores that we got with them reporting their food noise, their current levels of food noise, and we can just look at the 3 different patient populations here. So we have the reduced group, the no change group, and the increased group. And what you can see is total food noise score from all of the scales. You see the increased group higher at about just over 80, 82, 83, and the reduced food noise group around like 63. And there's basically a dose response here of reduced, no change, and increased, and with a 20-point spread. And so yeah, there definitely is a group that is reporting reduced food noise, and it is helping them, and it comes out in their scores. However, when we look at the subscales, what we see is that in the emotional craving subscale, for example, the reduced and the no change group are not different from each other, but the increased group is different from both the reduced and the no change. And that's true for emotional craving, loss of control, and positive expectancy. The one place where we see group differences across all of the groups is in preoccupation with food. So those that are reporting high levels of food noise and increased levels of food noise are higher than the no change group, and the no change group is higher than the reduced group, really lending data to show that it really is the preoccupation more than anything else that is being reduced in these patients, and that's one of the things that's helping them the most with their symptoms. And I think there's a few different scales that are out there, but I think Weight Watchers actually has a scale available on their website as well. So if anybody's wanting to check that out. Now, changes in food noise, then we took these groups back to that consumer level data, and we said, are there differences in how people are reporting their cravings? And so what you can see here, I won't get into the nitty gritty of the statistics here, but basically what you're seeing is the craving more after being on GLP-1 medications is actually reduced. So that's saying like, yeah, everyone kind of says like, oh, I crave this more and I like this more and I purchase this more. But when we break the groups up and we have our reduced food noise group, their craving doesn't come up as high as the other groups report. And their craving for fruits and vegetables is higher than sweets and salty snacks. So we're getting a differential there as well, which is really nice to see. And that holds true when we have them look at their current levels. So when they're just reporting like how much is your craving for this food category right now, so is it weak or strong, we see a difference with them being slightly lower. So the reduced food noise group is slightly lower than the other groups. So again, just kind of speaking to it, lending them an edge. And so in conclusion, what we see in our data is that people perceive positive changes in their purchase and cravings, particularly around fruit, vegetables, and proteins. Essentially, this gives us a window of opportunity, particularly for registered dietitians, as patients are more concerned with health and they're willing to incorporate a greater variety of foods into their diet. And then finally, understanding your patient's personal experience with food noise can help you determine the best approach when discussing eating behaviors with them. And with that, I think we'll head into our questions section with Emily.
Yes, Travis, excuse me. And Michelle, that was great. There was a lot of discussion going on in the chat. We had questions coming through. Obviously, this is a hot topic. I think we all knew that coming into it. So let's jump in to our Q&A for the last 10 to 12 minutes or so that we have left of the hour. One of the first questions, Michelle, that we got was on the protein target based on weight. And there was a lot of discussion in the chat about actual weight, adjusted weight, ideal weight. So wanted to get your take on that. What is that protein target based on?
We included the protein target based on current body weight. I personally, this is a personal opinion here. I think ideal body weight is a completely antiquated way of thinking about nutritional needs and adequacy. I personally do not want to have a conversation with a patient and tell them what their ideal body weight is and then base my recommendations off of that. So we really leaned heavily into the bariatric surgery literature, which traditionally does utilize ideal body weight, unfortunately. And we tested a variety of different ways of thinking about this, including ideal body weight, current body weight, and nutritionally, we saw that it was sufficient when looking at the current body weight, and it was much more acceptable for patients to talk about their current body weight and basing their nutrition recommendations on that than some arbitrary decision of what somebody's ideal body weight would be. I'm sure lots of people disagree with me on that, and that's okay. But I feel very strongly about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of conversation in the chat going back and forth. Thank you for that, Michelle. Travis, I know you had answered this in the Q&A, but I wanted to bring this so everyone could see it. What is the ideal lean muscle loss, since weight loss will cause muscle loss anyway? So just wanted to bring that to the greater group.
Yeah, so I think my answer was uh you you typically lose muscle mass with weight as you don't have to support carrying the weight around anymore, right? So that's a natural thing that we would like to occur. I think there's some concern currently with GLP-1 medication patients that they're losing a little bit more than we would anticipate. So normally you lose that in like a 1-to-3 or 1-to-4 ratio is usually what you like to see. But so somebody asked like, what's the best, like what should we be concerned about? And I think you should always be trying to work towards almost no muscle loss. That it's gonna be really hard, right? Like, but what that usually comes down to is adequate protein intake and then including the resistance exercise in some way. So that's where like Michelle's program, for example, is really on point with that, is really highlighting that with your patients, getting them into some resistance training, which I don't think has always been traditional counseling. It's a little bit more like cardio based and walking based, really, right? But including that resistance training will help maintain that muscle mass as they're losing the weight.
Yeah, there's a meta-analysis that was recently completed showing that when you're trying to maintain or actually build lean mass, about 90% of the effect comes from resistance training, whereas only about 10% of the effect comes from protein. So protein remains to be incredibly important, but to optimize effects, you really want resistance training that's progressive.
Yeah, and I guess we should also mention, if we're going to talk on that topic for a second, is like your like weight training. You don't have to be a bodybuilder. You're usually looking at about like 5 to 8 kind of whole body exercises, and they can be real simple, like because you're talking about people with elevated weight, so they might not be able to do push-ups. So it could even just be curls with light weights. Some things that are achievable for some people, chair squats, those types of things. Yeah.
Adaptable, yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Like you
different,
don't have to go
yeah.
into like hardcore like bodybuilder mode. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate those comments. Okay, so I think one of the biggest questions that we had come through in both the chat and the Q&A was around what happens after GLP-1 use, once they go off those medications. So we had, I have a question, and then I would love to hear comments from both you, Michelle and Travis, if you have them. So what is the percentage of weight gain after the medications? And then what are those recommendations after they go off GLP-1s?
So the pharmaceutical trials show that about 2/3 of the weight is regained after 1 year. That's basically in line with what we would expect. Anytime you stop any biological agent, you're going to see a rebound in whatever the, condition that was that it was treating. If you stop your blood pressure is going to go back up. You stop your insulin, your blood glucose is going to go back up. So not surprising on that end. We're currently doing a randomized control trial looking at taking folks who have lost a significant amount of weight on GLP-1s and randomizing them to either our Weight Watchers behavioral program alone, the behavioral program plus naltrexone bupropion, which are just oral, easily accessible medications, or a behavioral program plus naltrexone bupropion and metformin, and trying to see what weight maintenance looks like there. In terms of strategies that we tell patients of what to do if they have to get off medications, it's not generally something that we would recommend, given that the data shows that pretty quick weight regain. But if for whatever reason insurance is stopped, it's just become cost prohibitive, or the patients don't want to do it anymore, you have to take that patient-centered approach. And in that case, it very much mirrors the lifestyle recommendations that you would recommend for any sort of weight management strategy. Prioritizing protein, about 20 to 30 grams per meal, ensuring patients are getting enough fiber, staying active with both the strength training and the cardio, monitoring, self-monitoring their food, their weight, their activity, etc. And then, of course, prioritizing restorative sleep, managing stress, and ideally having some sort of comprehensive evidence-based program to support you or a comprehensive clinical care team. Travis, I'm sure you've got great insights.
Well, yeah, I don't know if I have anything much to add beyond that. I would just say, like, yeah, anecdotally too, to that point is, a lot of doctors that we talk to, they say their patients don't take the medications like they should, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of people hopping on and off, taking them at specific times for different reasons. Sometimes it's cost, and sometimes it's like side effects, different things like that. And so yeah, again, I would just highlight like taking that patient-centered approach, really like tailoring and understanding what your patient's doing, making sure that they're talking to you about their medication usage, tracking things like their food noise might be helpful with that, right? So just talking to them about those things. And then again, that window of opportunity of like, once they're on there, they're losing that weight. That's for the longest time in behavior, we've heard that forever, where it's just like, oh, if I could lose that 20 pounds, then I'd be on the right track kind of thing. We have that now, right? And so really kind of maximizing that with your patients and trying to get those healthy habits in place. You've got that window for about 6 months, before we see people start to drop off their medications and stuff like that. And so really just trying to maximize that time when possible.
Thank you. Michelle, we had a few questions too coming through regarding eating disorders, whether it's prior to GLP-1 use and if there should be screenings or if it's following the weight loss from GLP-1 use. I'm not familiar if there's much research here on that, but would love to get any comments or thoughts on those questions or statements that we had come through.
Yeah. Um, so generally, we recommend folks with a history of anorexia nervosa or bulimia to not be prescribed these medications. That's just the more conservative approach that we've taken clinically. Others may have differing opinions on that. What I can tell you is what we're seeing with folks with binge eating disorder. We have a patient who used to have an average of about 2 to 3 pretty significant binge eating disorder episodes per week. And she has not had a single episode since she got on a GLP-1 medication, not one. So she said even if she didn't lose a single pound, she would still want to stay on the medications because from a quality of life perspective, it has improve so much. And as you saw from the data in our clinical trial, we are seeing significant improvements in disordered eating pathology. However, these were all folks who did not present with an active eating disorder. So, that needs to be taken into consideration from a generalizability perspective. Travis, what are you all seeing in your data?
Yeah, I mean, very similar. Like what I was showing too. I think looking at those subscales like we were, I think a lot of people were concerned that there was going to be a push away from like food being rewarding or anything like that, right? And then that feeds into eating disorders, maybe skewing to the other side of the eating disorder spectrum, right? And so, but what we were really seeing, it's just the preoccupation with food, which drives a lot of these behaviors anyways. And some of the control, right? So we saw reductions in like the loss of control scales, different things like that. And so that's really heartening that it doesn't seem to be just obliterating people's relationship with food. But it does provide this like relief from constantly thinking about it. And so, depending on the eating disorder, that's going to play a role, right? But I think for most people at elevated weight, it's just going to help them to free up mental resources to deal with those eating disorders more directly or try and get towards like the underlying cause, right? So it might not fix everything, but it's definitely a help if nothing else. At least from the data that we're seeing so far.
Yeah,
Always
and
caveat.
it sounds like there's so much more research to come, right, as this evolved, as this became, we're seeing more and more people go on GLP-1s. So interesting. I mean, we are already at time. So that was our last question. I know we had many, many more, but I don't think this conversation is going to end here. I think it's going to only continue. So thank you both so much. That was wonderful. I know I want to rewatch the recording just because there was so much great information there. But thank you so much for both of you. Thank you all for attending. I'm going to pass it over to Leslie to wrap us up.
Excellent. Thanks, Emily. Thanks, Michelle and Travis. That was awesome. I know everyone's probably going to watch the recording several times over. But with that, we've reached the end of our webinar. Thank you all for joining us. You see the credit claiming instructions on the screen. Your attendance certificates should be available to download. Just follow the instructions on the screen. They're also the final slide of the handout with information on how to complete the evaluation to then grab your certificate. I know some of you said you missed the handouts or had trouble downloading those. They will be included in the credit claiming email that will be sent out in the next 24 hours. So you can re-download those or access those if you missed them. And then they are also available on the CE Learning Library website as well. So with that, thank you everyone for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your day and look for the recording of this to come very soon. And take care all.